Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Annual Conference. For those of you who may not know me, I am Joanna Collins from the General Section, and I am the current president of this great academy. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce the plenary session, and then I will turn the mic over to Marla Carroll, who is the chair for this session. The title for this session is Navigating Invisible Wounds, Mental Health and Well-Being Across the Forensic Spectrum. I don't typically read off of scripts, but today I'm going to make an exception because of the significance of this topic, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything or mess anything up and get off task. So forensic science practitioners routinely operate in environments defined by high-stakes decisions, demanding workload, administrative burdens, and repeated exposure to violence and human tragedy. While this impact of this work varies by forensic science discipline and individual, this often unseen consequence can reshape views, challenge well-being, and influence professional performance. Despite these challenges, considerations for the mental well-being for the forensic workforce have historically received limited attention. This presentation will provide a comprehensive overview of the psychological risks and the well-being needs of practitioners across the diverse spectrum of forensic science disciplines, from the scene to the laboratory to the courtroom. The speakers that sit before you today represent a myriad of disciplines. They are going to bring their perspective and their experience and interweave personal experiences with that. So with that, I want to thank Marla Carroll for helping to put together such an amazing panel, and co-chair Dr. Edward Mazuchowski as we go forth with this plenary session. As was mentioned earlier, if you could please silence your cell phones. I understand people are going to walk in and out. That's absolutely fine. But please silence your cell phones. Thank you very much. Marla?
Thank you, President Collins. My name is Marla Carroll, and I have the honor to be chair of this 2026 plenary. President Collins has brought together a fantastic panel today. As diverse as their careers may seem today, we will see how much we all have in common. Over the past year, as preparing for today, I have learned that these very special people up here on this stage speak for me. And I believe that perhaps you will find during this presentation, and certainly by the end, that they may speak for you as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Gregory Mack. Dr. Mack began his law enforcement career 39 years ago with the New York City Police Department, retiring in 2007 at the rank of detective specialist while simultaneously serving as a police psychologist. While working as a beat cop in Midtown North Precinct, he earned both a bachelor's and master's in forensic psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He then completed another master's degree and a PhD in clinical psychology at St. John's University, all while working NYPD's elite mounted unit on horse patrol. Over the course of his NYPD career, he received multiple commendations, including a unit citation for his participation in the medical division's response to the September 11th terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. He currently serves as the Deputy Director of the NYPD's Behavioral Care and Support Section in the Medical Division. Dr. Mack is a New York State licensed clinical and forensic psychologist, and for over 25 years, he has been an educator at various institutions, currently as an adjunct professor at Pace University. Dr. Mack and co-author Dr. Monica Brooker recently had their paper on enhanced trauma-informed policing published in the JFS special section on vicarious trauma in forensic scientists. Lastly, Dr. Mack is one of 5 founding board members of the Institute for Trauma-Informed Public Safety and Education, Inc., a nonprofit dedicated to addressing adverse childhood experiences, vicarious trauma, and moral injury among public safety and education professionals. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Gregory Mack.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, President Collins, for the invitation to speak today. It's my pleasure to do so. When I think about public speaking, I ask myself, would I rather be responding to a traumatic critical incident or speaking in front of you wonderful people? And I'd rather be here than doing that, so thank you. So I constructed this timeline just to give you an idea of the expanse of my career, the career of a NYPD police officer, of a deputy director currently with NYPD, and being a forensic student. And so I'm just going to take you through my career. And before I was a police officer, my dad was a police officer, so I come from a family of police officers. He was a New York City Transit Authority sergeant and rose to the rank of sergeant. He worked many different details. And growing up as a child, I remember the stories that he would tell with regard to some of the incidents. There was the sporting goods store robbery where the perpetrators were firing a lot of bullets and the cops were firing a lot of bullets, and it was just a free-for-all. About the 12-9s, person under a train, where the police officers were tasked with picking up body parts or labeling body parts. And so these are the stories that I grew up listening to. Probably not unlike some of you forensic parents that share your work with your family and kids. Hey, guess what? We found remains of, you get the point. But grew up in a wonderful family. This is us during Christmas. Grew up in the Bronx, born in the Bronx. And Mom was a very detailed-oriented disciplinarian. This is our family gathering. And with most families of African-American descent, there are experiences that can be transmitted generationally. So the intergenerational trauma that was prevalent in my family has affected my mother, father, growing up, being affected by different events historically. And so my older brother was a police officer. He retired as a detective. That's me in the police academy, graduating back in 1987. So I'm a lot younger than I look. This is me on patrol, and I got the opportunity to meet Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was walking down the street, Fifth Avenue. This is in front of the Plaza Hotel, and he had a cane, and his health was failing, and he was walking with June Carter Cash. So quite naturally, I asked June Carter to take the picture for us. I guess she's used to that, right? I guess she's used to that. So she was kind enough to take the picture. So some of the fun stuff that you get to do and meet people on the department. That's my brother, Roger Mack. He was the first African-American in the New York City bomb squad. He rose to the rank of second-grade detective. He won many awards. Again, for police officers that say, I want to handle bombs and deal with that kind of stuff, yeah, that's not something I was willing to partake in. So again, as I look at my career, I realize, and it doesn't hit you right away, and you might be able to relate to this, you don't really realize the trauma that you're absorbing while doing the job. You're motivated, you want to do a good job, you want to show up on time, you want to impress your supervisors, and you want to make a difference, right? So you commit yourself, your time, your energy. But as I get older, and I've been doing this work for over 28 years, you start to realize this stuff, it takes a toll. It takes a toll. That's why this conference and the president's focus on this is innovative, because it's new, as if trauma was something new. And so I realize I've experienced, traumatic events that can take a toll, racism, discrimination, natural and man-made disasters. We all just survived the pandemic, right, where it took its toll on us, and potentially morally injurious events. And so just a little bit about moral injury. There's the betrayal, transgressions that either you or others commit. And we're just now starting to realize the impact of moral injury. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow looking at its relationship to suicide in police officers, because it's been a mystery. Why are cops killing themselves at such high rates? And the VA, the veterans, military, they've been looking at moral injury for quite a while now. But in terms of law enforcement, this is relatively new. So we're going to be looking at the literature to see what may be going on in terms of moral injury. Oh, yeah, I just said that. And so when I was in the mounted unit, in the mounted unit, you get trained for about 6 to 8 months. And one of my instructors, Police Officer James McGee, assisted us in the class in learning. I was born in the Bronx, if I didn't say that already. And so my only experience with horses was going to a dude ranch with Dad and Mom. We went to a dude ranch, and I fell in love with horseback riding. So I said, after I became a cop, let me do mounted patrol. And so during the training, we had plenty of instructors, and Officer McGee was one of those instructors. And so he ended up taking his life in 1994. He was a drinker, like many officers are. That's how law enforcement copes with stress. They don't do drugs normally. It's normally alcohol. And so he struggled with that, struggled with his own mental health issues, and ended up hanging himself. And again, suicide, police suicide, is such a devastating event. So as I mentioned, my brother was in the bomb squad, and during the 100th anniversary, celebrating the bomb squad, I met Lydia Martinez. So we sat at the table. My father was there. That's a picture of me, my brother, and father. And I sat next to Lydia, and she had one of the most wonderful personalities, just a great person. She was a hostage negotiator. She was a detective, second grade. She worked in the domestic violence unit, and just a wonderful spirit. And after we met, she sent me a handwritten note saying it was nice meeting you, and it was wonderful to get to know you and your father. And unfortunately, in 2007, during a breakup of a relationship, she took her own life. So again, the causes of police suicide, the reasons, typically, you know, it's involving some type of relationship issue. There's a relationship breakup that is the driving force behind ultimately taking your own life. This young man was Lafayette Parish Deputy Sheriff Clyde Kerr, and he's from this area, from this area. And he had posted a series of YouTube videos prior to him taking his own life. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard of this event? So again, it happened in New Orleans. He was a resource officer, so he worked in a school with kids. His father, Clyde Kerr II, was a renowned jazz musician. He taught in the local schools. And his grandfather was also a musician. And so, you know, had a lot of roots in New Orleans, and he posted a series of videos complaining about the police brutality against black people, the mental health needs of police officers, the divisiveness that was going on within society, children's exposure to murder and violence and other negative traumatic events. And he struggled to reconcile being a police officer, being a part of this machine that he viewed and that was, and currently still is, really abusing and taking advantage of people who are less fortunate. And so it's, and I too, you know, find myself on the front lines of protests and being called different names, Uncle Tom and this and that, because I'm on this side of the line. And again, you know, you show a brave face, but that can take a toll as well. But being a black person, being a police officer wasn't my first experience with racism or being discriminated against. I can recall one roll call where my lieutenant, so you stand in the morning, you muster up for roll call, stand at attention, and you listen to a briefing by your supervisor. And this was during the Crown Heights riots many years ago, before many of you were born. And so the lieutenant was describing who the combatants, so to speak, were. And so he described, oh, so you have the guys with the curls, and then you have the knit. And I was standing right there, and we made eye contact, and he chose a different word. And so, you know, being exposed to that is not anything new. And, you know, we all relate to our own different experiences, whether it's gender-based discrimination or race or orientation. But I think the beauty is now is that people are finding their voice. They can speak and advocate for themselves. And so just to go back, with regard to Deputy Kerr, you know, the tragedy of suicide is the impact it has on a family, right? You see these two beautiful kids, and what is their legacy? What do they get to carry on? What story do they get to share, right? These little kids, they're gonna grow up and describing in different venues their tragedy that they suffered and lived through. So suicide is one of the worst devastating things that can happen to a family. Again, responding to police suicide, going to the scene of suicide. You go to the scene, you go into a home, and last year I responded to a police suicide, and it was around Christmas time. So they had the tree up, they had the gifts under the tree. On the refrigerator, they had the pictures of the kids. And I go into the bedroom, and there's blood splatter on the ceiling and on the floor. And you just realize the devastation that this act, so permanent, and it's devastating for families. I also worked at the VA for 8 years, and the horrific stories that I absorbed, I worked on a post-traumatic stress unit, and you just listen to the horror. One vet said he was disciplined. His father nailed him to a barn to beat him, and showed me the nail marks that were in his hands. And so the inhumanity that we do and carry out, it's difficult listening to the stories, but it's also realizing these people lived through it. That was probably one of their worst experiences. And so supervisory behavior is vitally important in being able to manage these stressors that you experience. Working under ineffective leadership certainly creates its own challenges. And if you've had the experience of having an ineffective leader, you understand what I'm talking about. The lack of support, the lack of encouragement. And for some people, you leave. And so in '92, I had the honor of meeting Chief of Department Scott. Wonderful person, upstanding person. It's an honor to meet the highest ranking person, uniformed person in the department. And it was in '24 that I met Chief Madry. Anyone familiar with Chief Madry's story? Well, quick story. I met him October 11th, 2024. 23. And he, I remember the date because it was my anniversary, but I chose to go to a meeting and meet with him rather than celebrate my anniversary. I told him the story of the work that I was doing and the work regarding enhanced trauma-informed policing, and he was on board with it. And yeah, call me, contact me, and I did, and he never responded. I guess he was too busy because, as you can see, he got caught up in his own bit of activity. So the trauma that you experience affects you, it affects how you interact with your family. Your emotional intelligence is extremely important in how you navigate trauma, being resilient, the different things that you need to practice, that I've practiced to be able to cope and to thrive, my post-traumatic growth. So again, what you need to realize being forensic scientists is that no one is going to come to save you. No one is going to identify your pain, your trauma. No one is going to come and say, hey, let me help you. You're going to have to do that yourself. And so what I've done, I've surrounded myself with different things that will sustain me. My relationship with my wife, my parents. This is me and my brother. It was Father's Day, and we were giving him a makeover, a little manicure. I got that twice. See, my wife was going to be in the audience, but she's back at the hotel sleeping. Family connections, so important. Be there for your family. Activities, we like to dress up, go to Comic-Con, do things like that. Hobbies, I tore my quad tendon, and so I had the time to put together this model and make a diorama, things of that nature. So it's important to have work-life balance and really take care of yourself. And that's my story. For me, I'll continue to do what's right, maintain peace and order, carry out society's values, just the way I was raised so that my parents can be proud of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mack. Our next speaker is Anjali Ranadive. She is president of SciLaw Forensics, a forensic science and legal consulting firm in Phoenix, Arizona. She serves as the DNA expert liaison for the Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice, assisting with post-conviction appeals. I know what the problem is. There we go. Ms. Ranadive is an advisory commissioner on AAFS's FEPAC, has served on the AAFS program committee in various capacities for over 20 years, and is a former member of the AAFS Board of Directors. She co-edited Ethics in Forensic Science, published by Elsevier Press in April 2012. Currently, she conducts training for law enforcement, attorneys, judges, forensic scientists, and other experts and consults on criminal cases involving complex scientific evidence, especially DNA, across the U.S. She is an adjunct professor at Arizona State University, where she teaches a course on testimony and ethics in the undergraduate forensic science program. Ms. Ranadive previously worked as a contractor to NIJ's Investigative and Forensic Sciences Division, where she served as a subject matter expert on Attorney General Reno's National Commission on the Future of DNA Evidence, was the coordinator for NIJ's 5 annual conferences on DNA and science and the law, and the facilitator of several technical working groups on various forensic sciences. Prior to NIJ, Ms. Ranadive worked as a staff DNA analyst at Cellmark. She holds a BA in biology from the Johns Hopkins University, an MFS in forensic science from the George Washington University, and a JD from the American University Washington College of Law, and is licensed to practice law in Maryland and the District of Columbia. And with that, I have the honor of introducing Ms. Ranadive.
Thank you. Thank you, President Collins. Thank you, Marla. I'm honored to be part of this esteemed panel. I think I represent many of you, and I want to talk to the newer forensic scientists amongst us that are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and at the beginning of your career, and then also to those of us that, like those of us up on stage and many of you in the audience that have been doing this for more than a minute. When President Collins asked me if I would participate, that's basically what she said. She said, "You've been doing this for about a minute. Maybe you could have some words of wisdom to impart." And I really had to think about it, just like Dr. Mack said. I've been in this field for 35 years. Yes, I did start when I was 5. But I've always wanted to be a forensic scientist. And again, for those of you that won't get this reference, we have YouTube, look it up. I was influenced by Quincy in the 70s. But I think one of the things that binds many of us together, and there may be exceptions, is that we all have empathy. We go into this field because we have a desire to help. And I looked up the definition, and as President Collins said, I don't like to read, but I'm gonna read the AI definition of an empath. An empath is a person who feels the emotions and experiences of others at a deeply personal level, often absorbing them as their own, which goes beyond typical empathy and sympathy. While it is not an official psychological term, the concept describes individuals highly attuned to the feelings and emotional status of those around them. I believe that many of us do this job because we're empaths. My first realization to that was when I was an undergraduate in college, and I did an internship in the emergency room, because at that time I was pre-med. That didn't work out, but I think I'm good. But I was doing an internship, and on the 4th of July, a woman was brought into the emergency room missing one of her toes. There'd been a person versus lawnmower accident, and she was not the victor. And my job as an intern, I couldn't do anything medical. My job was to hold her hand and just help her through the process and explain what was happening and just be someone for her to talk to. And I realized that as I sat there at her bedside, all of a sudden I had fainted. And when I came to, I was in a hospital bed because I had fainted while I was there. I had to have a full workup and get admitted to the hospital. But I realized that what had gone through my head right before I lost consciousness was that I felt so badly for her and for what she was going through and her emotions and her pain that I absorbed it into myself and had a physical experience. Many of you also know that as my fun job, well, this is a fun job too, but my other fun job is I teach fitness, and I've been doing that for 35 years as well. And there's a running joke with my class participants, because when we're doing something hard, I like to make jokes. I like to try to make it fun. Yes, they're working hard. Yes, they might be in pain. Yes, they're sweating, but it also needs to be fun. And I will often say to them, I know it's hard. I know you're tired. I just don't care. And then we all share a good laugh, because they know that that is the furthest thing from the truth, that I am probably more invested in their health and their overall well-being and their fitness and their mental well-being than they might be themselves. We've created within the gym a community, and very often when it's time to start class, I have to, hey, you guys, social hour's over, we need to do this workout thing that you came for, and then you can resume talking to each other, because they're accountable to one another. They show up for one another, not just for the workout, but for that sense of community. In our line of work, we deal with the most egregious and horrific things that human beings can do to one another. And whether you've been doing this for a month, a year, or decades, that takes a toll. Other professions certainly experience vicarious trauma as well, and we may overlap with other professions. Doctors see victims of accidents and disease and things that are also potentially equally as horrible. First responders might see acts of God. They might have to respond to accidents or other types of incidents, and they may also see some of the same things we see. But from a laboratory perspective, whether you receive just a piece of a swab or a piece of evidence that has no correlation to anything specific, or whether you get the entire case file with all of the dead body pictures and the crime scene photos and all of the police reports and the suspect interviews, whether you get all of that information or whether you get almost none of it, we know that we wouldn't be at the bench working on that case were it not that somebody was affected. There was a victim in the case. Somebody suffered. And that is why we are here. But it takes a toll. I know as scientists, we are not supposed to have a stake in the outcome of the cases on which we work. But sometimes there are those cases that stick with you. It's not just one and done. You don't just work on the evidence and issue a report. You may work on that case for years. You may be very invested. I've had cases where I've been involved for 4 or 5 or 6 years working on multiple batches of evidence, testifying in pretrial hearings, testifying at trial, maybe even being involved in an appeal after the conviction. I will never know if that defendant in any given case was truly innocent or not. but I am invested in the outcome. I have invested emotion. I have invested blood, sweat, and tears. I've invested in, and when you don't, do we really care about our jobs anymore? So I always make it a point to ask, usually the attorney can't be bothered, but I will try to ask the victim witness coordinator, hey, I know I'm not top of your list, but once the verdict comes in, if someone could just let me know what it was, it would make a difference to me. I think, and I hope I'm not alone, we care about the outcome because we want to know that what we do makes a difference and that in each case justice is served, whether that means conviction or acquittal in any given case. And sometimes we're insulated. We don't get all the facts. It doesn't go to trial. Maybe what we do contributes to somebody taking a plea. But we still have to go through all of the information, all of the photographs, all of the data, all of the case facts. And that takes a toll. In my current employment, I am very fortunate to be working part-time for the Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice. And in that role, I interact with Innocence Project organizations and conviction integrity units that are working to help those who claim they've been wrongfully convicted seek justice. In these cases, these individuals may have been incarcerated for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And again, although I may never know the ground truth of whether someone was or was not in fact guilty, these cases go on for years. And the amount of time and energy and emotion that goes into the work that we do can be devastating. When you work a case for several years and it comes to getting new testing done and we find out that that original defendant was in fact guilty or that the evidence supports guilt, that can be devastating after many years. And likewise, if we are able to help someone find exoneration, the fact that that person was incarcerated for so many years it doesn't cure the loss of those years of their life. How do we as forensic scientists come to terms with knowing that someone who might have lost decades of their life, it could have been in part due to something within our realm? Prosecutorial misconduct, whether purposeful or not, ineffective assistance of defense counsel, law enforcement coercion, or faulty forensics. We know that that has been a cause in many wrongful convictions. And knowing that we work in that area, it takes a toll. There's a lot of interest in forensic science. Since I've been in the industry, I told you, those of you that are, not my age, Quincy, it was a TV show in the 70s, was the only one that I know of that had any aspect of forensics way back then. But now we're inundated. You can't turn on the television without a forensically themed show or a podcast or a movie or even something that might not have a forensic focus, might be a complete, just a cop action show. They're still gonna send stuff to the lab. There's still always a lab somewhere behind the curtain, right? So there's a public interest in forensics, but that's also a double-edged sword because those of us or those amongst us that have made media for doing things not quite the way that we are supposed to do them. And you're all familiar with those stories. I'm not gonna go into them, but when you open up I was gonna say the newspaper, but I don't know if anybody reads the newspaper anymore, but when you turn on the television or get on your phone and look at the news, it seems like there's always a new scandal in a lab. And even though the majority of us are doing good, sound, reliable, ethical work every single day, the public perception is that we're all lumped together with the ones that they hear about that have gone rogue. And that takes a toll. As much as I'd like to think otherwise, there's still a stigma surrounding mental health. hopefully, as we do things like this plenary session, we bring it more to light. I was talking to Marla earlier, and I made a point that when my parents were this age, you didn't talk about things like menopause. Yeah, I said it. All the women laughed, all the men were like, but and gentlemen, if you're married, you're probably talking about it too. But it's real, and it's not something new, but it was one of those things that nobody talked about. It was private, right? And now, again, you can't turn on the news without menopause podcasts, menopause books. Oprah's talking about it, because all of those celebrities are now going through it, and so they're using their platform to share about it. We are talking more about mental health nowadays than we did. It used to be a secret thing. People, if you sought help, you didn't talk about it. Nobody wanted to know. You didn't, it was like a family secret. As scientists, we know that there are biochemical causes for certain mental health issues. And yet, because of that stigma, I don't know that we're all taking advantage when and if we need it. There are anecdotal stories of people in every discipline, but within our discipline as well, of people who have acknowledged this stress, this vicarious trauma that our jobs put us through, and have sought help and have had that used against them, either to question their fitness to testify or even to try to get them excluded completely from doing their jobs or testimony. How can we be expected to take care of ourselves if by taking those very steps we risk our livelihood? And I don't have an answer to that. I put that out there because I think the fact that we're even talking about it is progress. The only suggestion I have is that we have to be secure enough in our roles to forge ahead, knowing that what we do every day is helping to bring a voice to those that may have lost theirs. And that by absorbing some of that trauma, we are putting good back into the world. But it takes a toll. So when it comes time to pay that toll, what do you do? Again, I've already told you, lots of you that know me know, I exercise. Excessively, I've been told. In fact, a few years ago, I came up with this brilliant idea. Maybe I was thinking, President Collins, maybe I even was thinking ahead. I thought, I'm gonna exercise anyway. When I go on travel, like to conferences like this, I get up at 5 in the morning and I exercise before the conference starts. I wonder if anyone would be crazy enough to do that with me. And so I threw it out there and I said, hey, as a wellness thing, I'd be willing to teach a free class if anybody, if the academy would advertise it. And I was pretty sure I was gonna be in the ballroom 5 in the morning by myself. I wasn't. Dozens of you showed up to do an insanity workout. It's actually called Insanity. And we did it for 2 or 3 years until it became a liability and we had to stop. But I have to tell you, I was very, very pleasantly surprised that so many of you showed up for yourselves. I know that 30+ years of working in this industry has taken a toll. I can articulate it, I can feel it, I can express it, but I internalize it until I was forced to sort of think more about it in preparation for this presentation. In a very timely but not recommended act of God, 2 months ago, my husband and I were in an auto accident. We were driving in downtown Phoenix in the middle of a Sunday, and we were T-boned by a distracted driver. Obviously, I'm okay, I survived. We both walked away. Our physical injuries were minimal. The trauma of that acute incident was worse than anything I've ever experienced, and I've been in car accidents before. I sought help within weeks of that accident because I am terrified to drive right now. I'm terrified to be a passenger when my husband's driving, even though it was not his fault at all. And it made me wonder why, for something so acute, I was willing to seek therapy to help me work through it. And yet I'm willing to shoulder 35 years of accumulated trauma without seeking help. Being asked to participate in this presentation made me realize that that's not healthy, and that I think the first step to taking help and to self-care is to admitting that there is something there that affects our relationships, our behavior, and even maybe our personality. I intend to look more into that for myself, but what I would say, especially to those of you that are newer in the field, and you might be more resilient than those of us that have been up here, been doing this for a little bit longer, pay attention. Pay attention to how you're affected, and don't ignore it, and don't negate it. Embrace it. It's part of that wonderful thing of being an empath that allows us to do this and speak for those who can't. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Kate Seigfried-Spellar. She is a professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University. She holds a BA in Psychology and Law and Society from Purdue University, MA in Forensic Psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and a PhD in Technology with areas of specialization in psychology and digital forensics from Purdue University. She is an expert in the psychosocial and technological factors associated with cyber criminal behavior, specifically on the criminological characteristics of grooming strategies of online child sex offenders. Her current research focuses on the role of knuckle and fingernail bed biometrics in identifying the suspects in child sexual abuse material. She works extensively with law enforcement agencies worldwide, conducting research on sensitive operational data and providing training related to vicarious trauma and covert online chat investigations. She is currently a global ambassador with ChildLight, a global child safety institute at the University of Edinburgh. Dr. Seigfried-Spellar was a Fulbright Scholar awardee at the University Research Institute of Criminology and Criminal Science, University of Valencia, Spain, for the project Analyzing Criminological Differences and Online Grooming Strategies of Child Sex Offenders in Spain. She is an AAFS Fellow, Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Vicarious Trauma, and the past Chair of the Digital and Multimedia Sciences section. Finally, she is a co-founder of the Child Sex Abuse Reduction Research Network, a yearly workshop that brings researchers and thought leaders together to share their work, foster new collaborations, and develop unified solutions to better address child sexual exploitation and abuse. Dr. Kate, please come to the podium.
Hello, everyone. It is an honor to speak to you today. I have my notebook that says, Reasons Why I Like Dogs More Than People. I'm sure many of you can relate. I had an opportunity being asked to present to you today to really look back on my career and, kind of how I got started and to look at the role of trauma. I always wanted to be a police officer. That was something that I knew from the very beginning. And so I thought, okay, I need to figure out if I can actually do the work. So when I was 18, I got an internship at a local sheriff's office. I called them and asked if they, accepted interns, and they said they've never had one. And I said, well, I'm gonna be your first. So I come in, and one of the first things I got to witness was a death scene. And I remember the lights and sirens, rushing to the scene, and it was awesome. I loved it so much. I loved taping off the scene, got to take the photographs, we interviewed the family members. It was a situation where it was an elderly gentleman who had committed suicide, and his wife had found him. He had asked her to go get milk in the morning so that he was alone and was able to do this. I it was such a crazy experience to have as an 18-year-old. And so when I got home from my day at the internship, I called my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and I said, I had one of the best days ever, and I think there's something wrong with me. And this has been honestly a theme throughout my career, and he said, there's nothing wrong with you. This is what you want to do. This is your work. This is your career. This is your job. So you being excited to see the things that you have been learning, the science behind it, this is what you're meant to do. And as an 18-year-old, I also think back how nobody called me from the sheriff's office and asked me how I was doing. We never talked about it. You know, the next day, went back in for my internship and kind of started all over. 25 years later, a couple weeks ago, there was a case on cold justice that was featured. And in my small town, we had a missing persons case that I got to, quote unquote, work. I just was in the background, but I went to all the interrogations, all the family interviews. We did all the searches for the local ponds. We brought in cadaver dogs. I was there for every moment of it. And this case was going to be featured on Cold Justice. And so I was really excited to watch it. We were sitting down a couple weeks ago watching this case, and I started sobbing. And my husband said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "That's the detective that sexually harassed me through the entire internship." And it was weird because I hadn't thought about that in a long time, and it took something that I loved so much and made it feel dirty. And it made me sad about the experience. And it was also this first time that I thought, I looked back as an 18-year-old and I was thinking, I'm about to choose a career that I don't know if people want me in, if they don't want somebody like me to be a part of. And clearly I stuck with it. It has been a challenge, a lot of barriers, and I can say I have surrounded myself with fantastic mentors. You guys know who you are. But it still is something that came up 25 years later, bringing back all those feelings of, am I ever going to be accepted? So I do analyze child sexual abuse material. That's one of the areas of research that I specialize in. And one of the things that I do is I read about 500, 600 chats, so chat logs between child sex offenders and minors. And I really want to understand the grooming strategies. And the reason for this is because if I can understand how an offender builds trust with a minor, convinces them to go offline into the real world to meet, then I can train law enforcement to sound like better 12-year-olds. And that's what I do. So I come in, I train with the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces, I work with agencies around the world, and I help them sound like better 12-year-olds online, based on the research that I've been working on for the last 5-10 years. But that means I have read a lot of horrible things. And again, I hadn't really thought about that because I've always seen the end goal of trying to make a difference, trying to, what we call, speed up the meat. Because if I can help build that trust more quickly, then that means law enforcement is going to spend less time chatting with this one individual and they can move on to another individual. And so to me, I always see that end goal and why the work matters. But that also comes with oftentimes viewing child sexual abuse material. So as an academic and researcher, many of you know that we're not allowed to, in the United States, be exposed to CSAM. It's illegal to work that type of material. I asked for special permission. So I worked with the local prosecutor's office, now at Ingham County Sheriff's Office, and I'm deputized. So I have special deputy status so that I can assist on these cases and actually see the material that my examiners, that my detectives are seeing. And I think about how I asked to do this work. You know, I could have picked any other area. I could be studying hackers. I could be studying any other cybercriminal behavior online because there's a lot going on. I will have a great career in this area, I know it. But I chose to ask to be exposed to this material. And again, I think it's because I have this goal of trying to make that difference. But what does that mean? That means I get phone calls from agencies like in Australia. And this was about last year. And they said they had one of the worst child abuse cases they've ever seen. And they wanted me to take a look at the CSAM content. They had 2 videos that were posted on the dark web, and they weren't sure if it was 2 offenders or 1 offender. One video was a 2-month-old, the other was a 2-year-old. So the first thing I thought is, who do I talk to about this? You know, who can I sit down and say that I'm about to be exposed to this content, And I need to talk about it. I can't talk to quote unquote normal people, right? So we'll talk about the normal people. I struggle with them. So I went to my mentor, fantastic human being who has been there for me since the beginning. And I went to his office, I sat down, I got teary-eyed and said, I'm about to have a case sent to me from Australia, and I don't know if I'm gonna be ready for it. I don't know how to mentally prepare for this. If somebody tells you it's the worst of the worst, what does that even mean? And so he said, this is why he doesn't do that research anymore. And it made me reflect and think that there might be a time where that's gonna be me. And maybe it's in 2 years, maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it'll be in 10 years, but there'll be a time where it's okay if I can't do the work anymore, which is why as an academic, I get to train up the new generation of people that are gonna be doing this work and this research and making a difference. The case came in, and the detectives in Australia sanitized it for me. So they told me that they took the time to go through all the images, they removed all the sexual abuse material, and sent me just the offender's hands, because that's what I specialize in, is knuckle biometrics. So I spent a lot of time looking at hands and doing hand comparisons. And I'm, to this day, so grateful that I didn't have to see the worst of the worst in their opinion of what that was. They took the time to protect me. And so I think it's also important for us to remember that we do at times have the ability to maybe protect each other and keep each other safe. Another case came in last year that was a Snapchat video. So somebody had posted a video of them abusing a minor on Snapchat, and the offender or the detective wanted me to work through it. And I go into the high-tech crime unit like I usually do, and I watch the video. I've learned some tricks of the trade from my detectives that I work with. We use Post-it notes a lot of times to cover up the screen so we don't have to see some of the abuse. We can just focus on, in my case, the offender's hands. But in this case, it wasn't possible to do that. So I watched the 13-second video over and over again, and I couldn't see any detail in the hands. The video was so blurry, it was so grainy, nothing. And I went home and I cried. I cried to my husband, and I said, I failed. I couldn't see anything. There wasn't anything there for me to find. And so I spent a couple of days kind of thinking about this case, and I thought, I'm gonna give it one more shot. So I ran it through some software that splits up the video into individual frames. 4,000 frames later, I went through one by one and confirmed that there's nothing there. And it was exactly what I needed. I just needed to make sure that I didn't miss something. I exposed myself to those 4,000 frames, and I'm okay with it. It was exactly, like I said, what I needed to do. I called the detective and said, I'm sorry, but there's not enough detail in the offender's hands. Couldn't even see a mole, couldn't see anything, but I tried. And that's what I needed to say. I needed to be able to say that I gave everything that I had, and I tried. Some of the images that I struggle with the most actually don't involve children, and that has been something that I've also really had to deal with. There is something in the cybercrime world called Rule 34, that if you can think it, there's porn of it. And so I always know that I'm gonna be exposed to really strange, weird fetishes, things that I never even envisioned, especially with AI now. But I was working a case, again, I put myself in the right mindset. I go in to know that I'm gonna be looking at a child pornography offender's collection, and I saw something called crushing videos. These are usually Eastern European women wearing really tall stilettos, and they stomp puppies to death. It's a type of pornography, a type of fetish. I knew it existed. I have a background in psychology, background in researching pornography fetishes, and I didn't, just because you know doesn't mean you'll be expecting to see something like that. And again, my normal MO is crying to my husband, calling him, and saying, there's something wrong with me, because I have seen some horrible child sex abuse cases, but the puppies, I can't do it. And he has to remind me that it's because you can't save puppies, but you try to save children. And that's the thing that I have to keep telling myself, that I need to remove the judgment of when I'm unexpectedly bothered by something, when in comparison to something much worse, that doesn't, quote unquote, bother me. And I think that's really important to constantly, again, remind myself. Like my very first death scene, where I was so excited to be in this career, starting my career path, and wasn't at that moment bothered by it. So last year, my colleague got a puppy, And I was excited to go meet the puppy. I, of course, had to sit down with the detective first. And so I was working through a case with the detective. They were going to be sending me some child abuse material to analyze, to look at the knuckle biometrics again. And I was working through, a little bit of detail. Let me know what I'm expecting to see. Do we think there's going to be enough ridges, different wrinkles and things that I can be looking for in the hands? Give me an idea, again, the type of child abuse material that's going to be sent. So after we discussed the case, we came up with a way for me to obtain the digital evidence. I had a colleague come by and say, hey, did you hear that the puppy died? And I had not heard that, and so I got up, I found a corner in the room, and I broke down. I started to hyperventilate. I called my husband, and I said, he thought something was really wrong because he couldn't understand me. And I told him that the puppy had died. And I said, and I had just finished talking about a child abuse case, and again, there's something wrong with me. Because I don't know why I can talk about this case, work through this type of material, but when I hear about the puppies, I just can't do it. And he, again, says it's because you can't save puppies, your work is saving children, and that's okay. And so this is always gonna be, I have a feeling, the reoccurring kind of trigger for me, is these little moments where I feel like I should be more bothered by a case than I am, and instead I'm bothered by something that, in my mind, I shouldn't be, such as the death of a puppy. Getting back to the normal people. So I consider myself a pretty outgoing person, but my favorite conferences are places like this, where it's totally normal to have a favorite serial killer and nobody judges, right? Peter Curtin is mine, so I'm really excited to see that tomorrow there's a presentation on it. I will be there. And I also love going to my ICAC conferences and working with law enforcement. But when I'm at a social event, a party, a get-together with people that are quote-unquote normal, I really struggle. I hate when people ask me what I do. I usually say I'm a cybercrime researcher, and then that sometimes sends them down the cybersecurity hacking track, which is great. I can play in that area, that's fine. But sometimes they want to ask other questions. And eventually I end up being the party pooper, the person who's like, oh yeah, I do research on child sexual abuse. And then they're like, oh. And the thing is that everybody always asks, well, how do you do this work? Like, how does it impact you? Well, if I say I really love my job, you sound crazy. Oh, I really love what I do. I look at child abuse material all day and I study offenders' hands. That sounds crazy. Or if you say, yeah, it's really hard work, they don't want to hear that either. So there's never really a good answer that I can give that makes me feel comfortable with where I am. I'm seeing some nods, that makes me feel better. So the normals are what I always tell people is my biggest trigger. Besides like the actual abuse material that I end up being exposed to, reading the child sex offender cases, it's having to have a normal conversation with somebody that doesn't understand what I do. And also I make them maybe slightly uncomfortable. I have a friend who used to be a homicide detective. And he told me that his friends outside of work loved to hear his stories, the type of cases he was working, the things that he was, investigating. But when he got moved to juvenile, the child sex crimes division, his friends stopped asking him questions, stopped wanting to hear his stories, and in fact told them that they didn't want to hear anything anymore. And I think that's really important too to remember is that you can lose that support system if you're in a space like mine where people become really uncomfortable with the stigma and talking about child abuse material and exploitation. So let's get into some of the research. So as the chair of the Vicarious Trauma Committee, last year we conducted a study looking at the impact of vicarious trauma and within the forensic science professionals. This really started from a study that I was looking at in 2016, where I was interested in the impact on digital forensic examiners and the amount of emails that I got about suicide, about how they didn't know their friend was struggling and that they wished they would have known more. Really, started this career path for me with not only understanding, the ways in which we can look at grooming offender behavior, but also looking at the impact of the digital evidence in general. And so this is now the findings related to a much more academy-wide forensic science professionals. All right, how do I click this through? Oh, there it is, got it, okay. So here's some of the survey items that we looked at. to measure psychological well-being. It's called the Perceived Need for Care Survey. This is actually one that's been previously used within the military to look at whether or not officers or military personnel realize that they might be in need of professional help and mental health services. So we use psychological distress scales. These are things that are measuring like depression, worthlessness, PTSD scale, the coping mechanism scale, so looking at things like distraction or maybe less healthy coping mechanisms like the use of substances, alcohol, drugs. And then the one that I think is most important is the stigma. The MHAT scale is what we call it. So looking at the ways in which we might be prevented from seeking professional help. So what are the stigmas associated with this? How many of you got a survey email last year? Excellent, okay, great. So we sent the survey out right after the academy, so it was around March, and we collected data until April. 18 years plus, you had to be a current member of the academy. One of the things that the Vicarious Trauma Committee decided we didn't want to do was ask you about your section. We were afraid that that might create stigma between sections. So, digital multimedia sciences, we're way more, messed up than this section. Things like that, right? Trying to avoid some of the stigma. So we didn't want to ask those types of questions. And we also thought that since some of our sections are a little bit smaller, that I might be able to link somebody's responses if I knew, their race, their gender, and they came from a smaller section, for example. So originally we had 819 people start the survey, but we had about 200 people we had to drop. They quit the survey halfway through, or they weren't current active members of the academy. And so our final sample was 618 individuals. 70% of them were female, and within the academy, we are currently at 60% female. So slightly more women were willing to complete the survey. Age range was 20 to 86 years of age, mean was 46. 52% said that they were working in the forensic sciences for 16 years or more, and over half of them worked in some capacity within the government. So whether that was local, all the way up to federal. The way that I looked at psychological distress was by collapsing the scale items, looking at the proportion of people who said that they answered often to always on some of these different psychological distress scales. So over 1/3 of our members said that they were often to always experiencing the following symptoms: fatigue, so 56%, sleeping less, and we saw that these scores were higher for those that had less time on the job, so fewer years of experience in the forensic science profession, and also for women. Now, if we take a look, we see that we had over about 1/5 of our members were reporting a wide range of psychological distress symptoms like concentration issues, all the way to depression. And again, we see the same trend that these scores were higher for women and also higher for those with fewer years of experience. So my little icons here were my attempt to show differences between sexes. And also the baby represents our fewer years of experience. I didn't know how to best show that, so that was my attempt. So here we have that less than 10% reported anhedonia. So that's kind of that feeling of numbness, or that numbness that we get, our lack of ability to have kind of emotional expression. And then suicidal ideations was 5%, but it was higher for men than women in the sample. There was a final question that we asked that looked at whether or not you just overall happy with your job. Are you just overall, how happy are you? It was split. So it was exactly 50% of our membership said that they're happy, 50% of them said they're not happy at all. Men did report, though, overall that they had higher scores of happiness. I have some quotes, and this is going to be a new paper that we're going to be submitting soon for publication consideration. We're doing a qualitative analysis of the write-in responses. So again, I think this really highlights that something from a scene, whether it's a crib, a blanket, the same car, driving down the same street, that could bring up memories, bring up psychological distress. Within PTSD, what we found is that only 8% of our membership that completed the survey met what we call the diagnostic criteria for probable PTSD symptoms. So this scale ranges from 0 to 80, and then the cutoff score is 31 or more. We saw no differences in gender. We also saw no differences or no correlation looking at years of experience. But what I was really happy to see is that when I looked at the proportion of people that were currently seeking help, currently seeking professional assistance, we saw that 76% of those that met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD were currently seeking help because of their work-related stress. So coping mechanisms, we did the same thing. We collapsed it and looked at the often to always, so the proportion of people that reported engaging in different styles of coping mechanisms. Some of these coping mechanisms are positive. So things like talking it over with your spouse or talking it over with friends. Other forms are not as positive, things like distraction or withdrawal. So in this case, we see that 50% of our members are more likely to talk it over with a significant other, again, higher for women. Individuals with fewer years of experience are more likely to find an activity that takes their mind off of things. They might also talk it over with friends. About a third of our members reported that they might try to forget about it. They try to be alone, so they're withdrawing from the things that they love to do, or they might be eating more. 21% of our members say that they use alcohol in response to their work-related stress. This was higher for women as well. 40% said that they are taking medication, like an anxiety pill, in response to stress. And I was happy to see that fewer percentages of people were more likely to use drugs or sleeping pills in response to work-related stress. What was interesting is that it was higher for men to say that they engage in religion or some sort of social organization, social club or group, compared to women. I have a friend who works EMS, and he talks about how he'll have a hard time driving, and he wants to avoid certain streets that he might have just had to had to work a case on. And it reminds me of this quote where somebody is avoiding the aisle in which there's children's clothing because it reminds them of a case that involved a child. So getting into our mental health stigma. So again, these are the things that are what we call barriers to help seeking, the things that keep us from wanting to go and ask for help. 30% of our members agreed that it would be difficult for them to get time off from work, and it's difficult to even get an appointment. This is higher for women and also higher for those that have fewer years of experience on the job. I hear a lot of times through my research that individuals say that there's such a case backlog that they feel guilty asking for help because they know that they need to get the work done, or they feel the pressure to get the work done, and there's no one else that can do it. About 15 to 18% of our members agreed that my superiors are going to treat me differently if I get help. I would be seen as weak, or they find it that they'll be embarrassed if they ask for help. Men were more likely to say that they do not trust mental health professionals. So these are some of the quotes that we're, again, analyzing and polling, and that second one is why we were here today. The second one is why we have the ad hoc vicarious trauma committee, and that's why we're trying to make a difference. There were quite a few written in responses that said lower mental health wellness is because of DEI, which takes me back to my fear of being that intern at 18 years of age, wondering if I was ever going to be accepted and be a part of this community. 70% of our members reported that someone that they knew has sought counseling because of work-related stress. And 39% of our members said that they personally are seeking counseling because of work-related stress. Only about 3% said that mental health support is a requirement of their job. And interestingly, about 3.7% reported that they have to notify their employer if they seek mental health services. We've hypothesized and discussed that maybe this is in relationship to being required to carry a firearm as a part of their professional role, but that is something that I think is interesting and worth looking into more. 39% of our members said that they currently believe that they need mental health support. So what are some of the key takeaways? One of the key findings that was pretty consistent throughout was this idea that those of us who have fewer years of experience within the forensic science community are more likely to report psychological distress symptoms. Now, this could be because of a couple of things. We have generational differences. This new generation that is coming up is more willing to talk about mental health, more willing to say that they need help and that they need support. There also may be a lack of developed coping mechanisms because they are so new in the field, and they haven't quite yet developed those skills to help them deal with the type of trauma and cases that they're working and analyzing. I'm seeing some nods. We also saw that men were more likely to report suicidal ideation, and women were more likely to report 16 out of 18 of the psychological well-being symptoms. Again, women might be more likely to report because statistically within research, we say women are more likely to say that they need help, more likely to report psychological well-being symptoms. We also know that women are more likely to experience other types of work-related trauma. So the work-related trauma that we're looking at isn't just exposure to content, isn't just exposure to the types of cases we're working. It's the work environment itself. We say that your work environment is an occupational hazard. It can make or break you. Whether or not you have supportive superiors, people that want you to do well, to be successful, to take that time off of work if you need it, to have these types of conversations, to reduce workplace and sexual harassment. And again, women were more likely to report challenges, those stigmas with obtaining resources, getting time off of work, and feeling like there's a lack of awareness within the community. So here's the QR code to the research study that was published in JFS. And thank you again for the support of the Academy, for seeing that this is an important area that we need to continue to research and understand, and also to the committee itself. My committee members are incredible, and our past chair, Kat Pope, who started it all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Daniel G. Martin. Dan Martin is a Superior Court judge in Maricopa County, Arizona. He was appointed to the bench in 2007 and is currently assigned to the criminal department, where he presides over a complex multi-defendant calendar. Judge Martin received his law degree from the University of Arizona and served as the managing editor of the Arizona Law Review. Following his graduation, Judge Martin clerked for Justice James Muller on the Arizona Supreme Court. After 7 years in private practice, Judge Martin joined the state of Arizona's Office of Administrative Hearings as an administrative law judge, where he served for almost 8 years before joining the Superior Court. Prior to his current assignment, Judge Martin completed rotations on the family, criminal, juvenile, and civil benches. Please welcome Judge Martin.
Thank you, Marla, and those are some pretty tough acts to follow, but I will try. First, my comments are my own thoughts. They don't necessarily reflect the thoughts of the Arizona Superior Court, although I suspect many of them are. I would like to begin by recognizing the often difficult nature of the work that you perform as forensic scientists. That work causes trauma, whether you know it or not. I don't think any of us is immune to that trauma that we experience, although some of us may manage it differently, and it may affect some of us more or less than others. But we do have control over how we process that trauma, and as the other speakers have noted, the first step in that process is recognizing that the trauma exists. One of the things peculiar to forensic science and the justice system is that the initial investigation and analysis, often the source of the trauma that we experience, is only the first step. Consider the crime scene in a homicide investigation. The persons responding to that scene experience firsthand the often very difficult details of a person's death. That is a first level of trauma. Some of those persons may conduct further analyses or write reports. That is a second level of trauma. Others may conduct analysis of the evidence or are otherwise exposed to the evidence in a case, and that is a vicarious level of trauma. But in a typical homicide investigation, many different forensic scientists will be exposed to evidence that can cause trauma. Now consider this. The investigation has been completed, charges have been filed, and a court case is proceeding. If you were one of the forensic scientists who performed work on that case, there exists a very real possibility that you could be called as a witness at trial or a pretrial proceeding, or be asked to participate in a witness interview. The point is, you may already have experienced trauma during your initial contact with the case, and you are now re-experiencing that trauma, this time in the more heated atmosphere of an adversarial court process. That process requires not only that you refresh your recollection of the events in issue, but also that that recollection be subjected to both direct and cross-examination. For better or for worse, you may be required to relive the experience in great detail, raising or re-raising issues that you may have believed you had already laid to rest. Now consider further. While you are reliving traumatic events as part of a court proceeding, you also are sharing them with others. Whatever part of the case you worked on, you have now passed it on to jurors, the lawyers, court staff, and finally, the judge. So in something of a cruel twist, not only are you being re-traumatized, but your testimony is passing that trauma on to others. From a judicial perspective, I know that trauma, both direct and vicarious, is real. I have experienced it myself, having seen many times over evidence of horrific acts that people have committed against others. But in my role as a judge, my responsibility goes beyond myself and my own well-being. I must also consider the effects that judicial proceedings have on others, and let me share with you just a few examples. Several years ago, I hired a new courtroom assistant. In some jurisdictions, you might know this person as a bailiff. She was competent and bright, but did not have any prior experience in criminal proceedings. Now, on her first day at the court, we started an aggravated assault trial where the defendant had been charged with repeatedly stabbing someone with a screwdriver. In this particular case, the altercation took place outside of a homeless shelter, and there was a security camera in place that captured the entire incident. That first day of trial, the prosecutor played that security footage for the jury in her opening statement. That was hard enough, but there was my brand new courtroom assistant sitting there watching it with basically no preparation. That was actually a failure on my part. I should have anticipated that the prosecutor might use that footage. But the damage was done, and during the lunch break, I pulled my new courtroom assistant aside and questioned her pretty closely on whether she was okay. Now, it turns out she was able to manage the experience okay. Yes, she does still work for me, but that was a heck of a first day. We had another trial not too long ago involving charges that a father had sexually abused his young daughter on multiple occasions. Now, as you can imagine, jury selection in these types of cases can be challenging at best. For this particular trial, we used an electronic questionnaire that we administered online to 160 potential jurors. Our main goal in using that questionnaire was to identify persons who, for one reason or another, would not be a good fit for this particular trial. It goes without saying that the subject matter was our primary focus. Now, we ended up bringing about 50 potential jurors into the courtroom for in-person jury selection. And there we continued to probe those jurors' fitness to serve on what we all knew would be a very difficult trial with very difficult evidence. At the end of that day, we were able to seat a jury of 15 to hear the case. Now, on the second day of that trial, my courtroom assistant, yes, the same one, informed me that one of the jurors had been expressing reservations about the case. The lawyers and I brought her in to speak with her privately, and she told us that when she saw the case on paper, meaning the questionnaire, she did not think that she would have any trouble with the subject matter. But after hearing the testimony of the then 15-year-old victim, she was having a very hard time. Now, not wanting to cause her any additional trauma, and in order to maintain the fairness of the trial for both sides, that juror was excused. In another case, a family court matter, a colleague of mine presided over an order of protection hearing. A mother and a father were in conflict. That conflict was spilling over onto the children, and the mother had requested the protective order. The hearing was held because the father contested the request that the order be entered. Now, after hearing the evidence, my colleague granted the mother's request for the protective order, but there was a catch. At that time, the father had the children, so they needed to arrange a time and place to meet and exchange the children before the order took effect. The father arrived with a gun, killed the mother, both the children, and then himself. The next example occurred longer ago in the courtroom of one of my colleagues. Now, he had presided over a very difficult, high-profile arson case, at the end of which the jury returned a guilty verdict. Unbeknownst to anyone else in the courtroom, the defendant in that case had concealed a quantity of cyanide on his person, which he took upon hearing the verdict. Within minutes, in the presence of everyone in that courtroom, he died of cyanide poisoning. Now, as hard as it might be, I want you to try and place yourself in that courtroom. You have just seen another person take their own life. Now, place yourself in the jury box. You have just rendered a guilty verdict, and in response to that verdict, someone has taken their own life. You may very well be thinking that your decision contributed to that death, even though you were performing your civic duty as a juror in the case. Now, to answer the question I suspect many of you are asking yourselves, my colleague had the jurors escorted out of the courtroom as soon as he was able and went and spoke with them personally after managing other matters in the courtroom that morning. He told the jurors that they must understand the defendant's decision was his and his alone and not their fault. But the court did provide counseling services for any of the jurors who asked for it. A final note about one of our own esteemed members, Dr. Kevin Horn of Path Bio, who may or may not be here today. Now, Dr. Horn may not consider this traumatic experience, but since we still tease him about it to this day, he just might. Dr. Horn was testifying in a murder trial, and he was describing the areas of the victim's body from which swabs had been taken for DNA analysis. One of those areas was the gluteal cleft. Now, apparently, the prosecutor did not think the jury fully comprehended the reference because she then asked if there was another more commonplace name for that area of the body, and Dr. Horn was forced to respond, yes, the butt crack. What I hope all of this shows is that trauma, both direct and vicarious, can occur at any number of stages in an investigation, but it tends to be repeated and magnified in subsequent legal proceedings. All of us must remain cognizant not only of the trauma that we experience and how it impacts us, but also how that trauma may impact others. As I was preparing to speak with all of you this morning, I asked my colleagues on the bench in Maricopa County in Arizona how they manage trauma. The answers were similar to approaches that you have already heard about this morning: awareness, self-care, focusing on family and friends, exercise, travel, and hobbies, to name a few. I myself get my feelings out by writing them down on Post-it notes, which I hold for a few days before throwing them out. Everyone has a different approach. But one of the global responses that we have implemented at our court is to form a judicial peer review team composed of judicial officers who are available to speak with anyone who needs to share an experience they have had. And I think we can all agree that sometimes just having someone there who's been through the same thing really does make all the difference. We've also become more sensitized as judges to the things that people see or hear in the courtroom. For example, now if a prosecutor is going to show autopsy photos to a forensic pathologist, I always ask that they give a heads up before they do that so that the people in the courtroom, particularly the jurors, have just a little time to prepare to receive that evidence. The same for other evidence, such as surveillance footage, which is becoming more and more common in the courtroom with so many more cameras being placed out in public areas. When they contain acts of violence, we want to make sure that people have a heads up before they see that footage. In sex abuse cases, there may be evidence, pictures particularly, sometimes video, that the jury needs to see because they are deciding the facts of the case. But that doesn't mean that everyone in the courtroom needs to see that evidence, so we will often bring in a separate video monitor so it's just the jury seeing that evidence and not everyone else in the courtroom. We cannot eliminate trauma in the courtroom, but we try our very best to minimize it to the extent that we can. I'd like to leave you all with a thought that I constantly remind myself of. We live and work in an imperfect world, and many of us daily see a slice of life that can be troubling at best, horrific at worst. Just remember that that slice, as bad as it is just that, a slice. There is still lots of good in this world, and when things get tough, you need to remind yourself of that good and wrap yourselves in it as tightly as you can. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. We'd now like to take questions from the audience. There are microphones around the chairs where you all are. If you would have a question for anyone specifically or the panel in general, please feel free to find a microphone and ask your question. Please.
Morning, everybody. That was an excellent panel. I found myself agreeing, especially with the normals. Dan will tell you that I'm always about the barbecue and how difficult it is to go to the barbecue. My question is about how to find the right healthcare professional. I always feel like you go and 5 minutes into the conversation, they're telling you how traumatized they are by what you're telling them. And it's much easier to talk to our colleagues and each other than it is to actually get professional help. So I just wonder if anybody has any insight into that.
Who would like to answer that?
I can.
Oh.
Go. No, you go.
Well, you know, you have to do your research. You want someone that's culturally competent, right? You know, and there are different types of practitioners. Some are buffs that wanted to be but didn't, and so now they're going to live vicariously through your experiences. But it's sometimes it's trial and error. Mm-hmm. You get someone, you want to read their, you know, CV, you want to read their training. But it's difficult, and it takes time. Hopefully your agency or agencies have a list of providers that have been tried and tested. You get feedback from colleagues that have, you know, been effective. But you know, one person's savior might be another person's worst nightmare. So sometimes it's trial and error.
So that was a sentiment that was echoed throughout the qualitative analysis that we're doing. The number of people who wrote in responses that they had a hard time finding somebody qualified who was willing to listen to them and work with them. So you're definitely not alone in kind of wondering where to go and how to find those resources. That was very consistent in the responses that we're analyzing.
I'm sorry, just to add, you want someone that's a trauma-trained therapist. People who are less prepared for the extent of what you're going to deliver to them. Because again, just realize you, in effect, might be traumatizing your therapist. I always feel
like I'm traumatizing the therapist.
Yes, and you probably are. But if they're trained and they're prepared, they see it coming.
Thank you. Our next question, please.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all. You were brave, you were vulnerable in front of this room full of strangers. So I just want to say thank you for that. I'm a forensic pathologist from the Boogie Down, so you know what that means. But my question is more for advice, and this is directed to Dr. Mack, and thank you. I didn't go unnoticed in your cadet, or what do you call it, your police academy class. You were the only one. And I'm speaking for the black and brown colleagues in the office, or in this room, where I've been the only one many a times, and sometimes the trauma or the anxiety laden comes from trying to be that one and be representative, and having to answer those questions. I did a presentation yesterday on representation matters, and I had some young up-and-coming people asking me advice, and I heard you say, you know, find your voice and speak up. I've been doing this for a while, and I was raised that way, so I have the confidence to do that, but it's hard for me to say to young people, just do it, you know, and be
Right.
that one. So I'm asking not only advice for the young and up-and-coming superstars, but advice for myself on how to guide them also. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a tricky it's a slippery slope because it's not always the time to speak out at the moment. That instance that I described at the roll call, I absorbed it. The powers that be, sometimes if you speak out, you're going to get worse posts, you're going to get, there's going to be retaliation. And so you have to find the right time. You have to pick colleagues that support you. Being the only one, what's worse is when you find a colleague that you share characteristics in common and they don't know it. So you think you have an ally and you approach them with this issue. We're in the struggle together. Struggle? What struggle? And so it's a slippery slope. And again, you have to do your research. You have to feel people out. Just because they look and sound like you doesn't mean that they have had the same experiences. And to me, that's always been the most shocking and off-putting, is that you think you have an issue in common and you realize you don't. So, yeah, you have to take a chance, and sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But you got to be smart about it. I was never the one to just start, protesting. Unlike my daughters who protest and get arrested and all that good stuff, I'm more conservative, so, in my generation.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Yeah, hi. One of the things that I've been curious about is that in reading the literature, for instance, of intrinsic religiosity that is associated with very high increases in the amount of emotional resilience and profound decreases in the rate of suicide, up to 50 to 70% decrease in suicide rate among people of high intrinsic religiosity. But nonetheless, in discussions like this that I see, I almost invariably find faith to be de-emphasized. Why is that?
We got any takers?
No answer.
I would say it's a good question. My personal excuse that I use is that when, as a police officer, instead of going to church with my wife on Sunday, I might be walking a foot post. I retired in 2007, so I can't use that excuse anymore. So I started seeing patients on Sundays while my wife goes to church. And so I don't know if it's a lack of faith or working in the business, the people in church, in some instances are the perpetrators, they're the discriminators. So I think I have my own personal biases, but it's a good question, good point.
Thank you. A question from this side, please.
Good morning. My name is Jimmy Roberts. I'm the coroner in Bingham County, Idaho, and I've worked in emergency services my entire adult life. I just turned 59 years old last month. I've always found it necessary to get involved in things when I discover that they're not going the way they should. I do believe that I am my brother and my sister's keeper. I believe it's my responsibility. I've certainly struggled throughout my careers to identify things that I can do to take care of myself, because I'll often put my needs in the background, right? It's this case, it's this fire, it's the next call, it's a consultation with someone else. And I still will tell you that I struggle with time management 100%. You know, I have dogs that I love all day long. Really difficult to hear those stories.
Yeah.
I totally get it. Those are the hardest cases to walk away from when there's not a family to take care of a dog when I respond to a death scene as an MDI. I also believe that I'm responsible to help the next person, and to do that, I need to be secure and squared away in what I'm offering them. I don't want to transfer my trauma on them or my bias or my prejudice based on what I'm trying to do inside me to keep going. I would encourage anybody and everybody to go interview a few counselors, psychologists, clergy, anybody that you feel like you might be able to connect with, and expect that it's not going to work out the first time. I remember sitting down with a therapist to talk about some of the work that I did at the World Trade Center in recovery work. I lived in Manhattan for many years. And the therapist was so into the fact that he's talking to somebody who was on the pile. It was unbelievable. And I became really angry. But then once I had time to think about it, I'm like, holy cow, there's a lot of people that don't understand this, even in the counseling field. So rather than take that and throw it out the door and say, you know what, all counselors are full of what I would normally say outside of a microphone, I needed to be responsible and pick it up again and just walk down the road and talk to some people. And I think there are people in this field that see and work with therapists. Please share it. I think AAFS could do a great job if they created a referral list with trauma therapists that are willing to work with these things, and we don't have to teach them about the trauma. Yeah. I know that when my wife and I went to couples counseling, because I believe that I don't always communicate the best and I can learn, I noticed that the therapist was focusing more on the stories, the cases that I recently had, than helping us talk about the things we need to talk about at home. All right, so this is a big deal. I do believe in God. I do practice in a church and a religion, but it's my spirituality that I practice more than identify with the dogma of religion. And has it taken me years to find a church or a place where I can do that? Yes. It doesn't happen the first time. If you pick up the ice cream and you decide you don't like vanilla, there's a few other flavors, so stick it out.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Thanks, Marla. Great presentation by all of you. Back in the 1900s, when I started in this field, as Anjali was saying, there wasn't anything on social media, because we didn't have social media, or all the viral kind of counseling you can get now or support that you can get now, so that's great for the younger people. But the question I have is, when I started working crime scene back when I was 24 and knew nothing about mental health or supporting myself in that way, when we would have an officer-involved shooting or an officer fatality or just any gruesome crime scene, I was a civilian crime scene investigator, and our agency would offer support to the sworn police officers, but not the civilian crime scene investigators. And we kind of, at the time, joked like, what's up with this? But I was 24 and I wasn't as vocal as I am now. And it was just up to us to find our own help. And so I'm wondering, from those of you who deal with this currently, do you find that there is more support now for those civilian people, not only civilian crime scene, but also our lab scientists, as well as even our educators or other civilians that aren't sworn officers?
I mean, I can take that from, I'm self-employed, so I'm not even with an agency anymore, but as I, as I mentioned in my talk, having suffered this car accident recently, the first thing I did after talking it over with friends and my husband, I just went through my health insurance because I knew that we had mental health. There was a mental health section, and you've got dental, you've got vision, you've probably got mental health insurance if you have health insurance. And to Laura's point, I went through and found a directory of providers that were within my network, within my coverage, and then they were listed by their specialties. So I didn't want someone that specialized in eating disorders. I needed somebody that specialized in PTSD because I was suffering this trauma from this accident. And I spoke to 3 different therapists before I found one that I vibed with. And I didn't feel like they took it personally if I was like, okay, thanks for that initial session. I almost felt like they were interviewing me as much as I was interviewing them. But it had to be someone I could trust and someone that, like I said, that I vibed with, but also I was looking for someone with certain expertise with a particular type of therapy for what I was experiencing acutely. But now that I've started this relationship, I intend, and she already knows this, to continue to see her after, if I can say that we put the acute trauma, if we are able to solve that. There's a whole host of other issues that I'm sure I have bottled up for, the decades that I've been in this field that I have not explored, and she's willing to work with me through that. And I don't want to say I'm looking forward to it, but I'm looking forward to knowing that I'm taking steps to care for myself. So I would say, see what you have available, even if it's not through your agency, through your insurance.
Thank you.
I would add the quick answer is yes. The civilians, 911 operators, crime scene techs there's a growing awareness, and again, it's education. With the stigma involved with police officers, overcoming that. And I saw it in the precinct. You would come in, make an arrest, or someone would get hurt, police officer get hurt. And the civilians, the clerks, the administrative staff, they're being verbally abused by the officers, they're being mistreated. It's education. I think there's more awareness nowadays that just because you're not on the street doesn't mean you're not being affected. And so, organizations like this and spreading the awareness it's so sorely needed. And so, yes, they are now receiving attention and awareness that they can be traumatized. So.
We have time for one more question. From this side, please.
All right, thank you, Marla, and thanks all of you for a fantastic presentation. My name is Dino DeCresci, and I'm a forensic psychiatrist, and I evaluate offenders, primarily sex offenders, for the last 20 years. And if I was to tell somebody what I do for a living, I've gotten a bunch of this particular question, which is, how does that affect you?
Yep.
And initially, I would have responded, it is what it is, basically. But looking at my own life and how I've changed over the years, I realize that it certainly has. I've struggled with the seeing humans as basically evil, mistrust of others' intentions, cameras around my house, my kids can never have a male babysitter, things of that nature. I wonder how this work has affected you in how you live your personal life. I'd appreciate it if you're willing to share it. Thank you. I'm going to sit down.
Thank you. We've got time for one answer.
Kate.
Good. Oh, okay. So, I don't have kids. My husband and I rescue basset hounds. So if you want to see photos, let me know. And so I would, the question I always get, well, maybe the reason why you can do this work is because you don't have kids. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if that's a yes, probably, no. I don't know. But what I do know is I have a tribe and a community, and so I love CrossFit. I'm a certified yoga instructor, so I try to find ways in which I can help improve my mental health, that self-judgment I kind of talked about earlier. And also, I love helping other people in their fitness journey as well. I surround myself with people like this where I can have conversations about serial killers and the cases that I work without judgment and without somebody asking me, oh, well, how does that impact you? How do you handle it? Because it is the one thing that is the most uncomfortable for me. But I think it's a process is what I would say. I'm, day by day, a process. I never know what's going to come up, trigger me, and I think that's okay, and I'm learning to accept that.
Thank you. That concludes our session for today. Please join me in thanking President Collins and the entire panel for
I know she said it's concluded, but I always want to have the last word. Just ask my husband. In this situation, I just really did want to thank the panel for answering my phone call, agreeing to my question, and bringing my theme and my vision to life. What you have contributed today is more than I could have asked for, and I appreciate you for coming here and being vulnerable and telling your story. So thank you very much. And lastly, as a public service announcement to the, somebody had asked about a list of therapists or counselors. In case you're not aware, the Academy has joined with BetterHelp, which is available through our website. So you can look at, now granted, it may or may not be paid by your insurance, but you can look at the various therapists. You answer a questionnaire, they try to match you with a therapist, and you can look at the different skill sets and levels that they have that may best serve and support you. So with that, yes, this concludes our program. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.